Hello, Internet. This is Grid Zeta, aka Zeta, formerly known as Skyhound 008. And if you guys have stuck through with my somewhat rushed but lengthy, in depth analysis of this graphic novel, kudos to you. Now, this last video here is just more of my general thoughts on the matter. Originally, when I was hearing about this, I was curious to see where the story would go, the path it would take, and how it exactly ties in. And I guess I could say acts as a sequel to Time Force. First off, this eventually became less of these two and focuses more on Jen. And while I did like her as a character and enjoyed her journey, so to speak, when I watched the show, to a degree, considering this is more of a multiverse scenario, in a manner of speaking, with the introduction of Time Force Black, who she is, how she relates to Alex, etc., etc., from a writer's standpoint, I would say that it did feel a little rushed. It left some logical gaps to a degree. I think this is where I would say the Disney brain would likely elaborate on this. And I'm pretty sure he may have read it, he may have not. I'll have to ask him about it. But again, I will leave the link in the description below on his take on the thematical elements of Power Rangers Time Force on the description below. If you guys have not subscribed to his channel already, I highly recommend you do so. He makes really great videos. Quick shout out to him on this. And I will say that if I were to really rate this, originally I gave this a 9 when I was pointing this out in Instagram. I, as a fan, would likely downgrade this from a 9 to an 8 for several reasons. Number 1, story, pacing, and plot. As a budding writer and one who has done review points on certain bits of pop culture, Power Rangers included, I would say that it felt like a mixed bag. Yes, it answered a few questions, but as I'll point out really quick right now, you cannot, technically speaking, solve one can of worms without adding more into the process and just making the matter worse. Did Time Force Black serve her purpose? Yes. Did it add to the lore of Power Rangers? Yes and no. Did it give a bit more into Dr. Ferrick's backstory? To a degree. Did it actually serve the overall narrative? Yes, it did. But, again, I gotta say, this is dealing with a multiverse here. Which version are we actually discussing in terms of the Rangers themselves, Ferrex, what have you? That, ladies and gentlemen, I leave to you. Now, in my humble, honest opinion, I would say this is more in the Hyperforce realm or leading to it for a few reasons. Number 1, with what Dr. Ferrix did to the morphing grid, some could say that him being the Frankenstein of the Rangerverse, what he did in the in between of space and time, he likely opened up a new can of worms. But here is my issue with the comics as a medium in general. 1. It acts less as a jumping point or a start off in terms of those who are interested in learning more about the Rangerverse. Number two, despite me being a fan, the writing style of some of these writers, it acts less of trying to add to the Rangerverse as a whole and begins to feel more like a fan fiction type of style. And in a way, if you haven't read Psycho-Path yet, I will say this. I say kudos to the ones that have braved through the whole thing and have read it and put their own reviews so that I, as a Ranger fan, will not have to deal with the debacle in terms of how bad the writing is. Again, this has to do with writing, nothing to do with art. I have no qualms with the artists on this. They do a good job on it. But the writing, from a budding writer's standpoint, it's got a lot of work. There are stuff that could be ironed out. I can say this as a fan. And those that have gone through this more than I have likely have a better grasp and depth in terms of writing in general. But that's just my opinion. But that being said, the art's great. There's no doubt about it. However, the issue with the comics, as I've already stated, it doesn't fully help in terms of adding to the universe per se. And there are other YouTubers that can attest to this. It's not just Power Rangers in general. Marvel has had issues with it. DC has had issues with it. Look at all that's happened throughout the years. It's gotten worse. I can attest to this as being an average fan. And I like reading comics. Even actor Mr. Keanu Reeves said that comics are great. But the crime against comics as a medium has been pointed out. And as a result, there are people that have been being silenced because of what's been happening. These idiots that know nothing of life, know nothing of reading, just sit behind a computer and just act like a bunch of douchebags. Put bluntly, the state of comics is pretty much dead. That being said, do I think it has to go back to going underground and starting from scratch? To a point, yes, it does. That being said, I will say this. I am going to reference this graphic novel in a lengthy but in-depth fan retrospect of Power Rangers Time Force itself. And I will eventually post it up on Minds. If you haven't checked it out already, you can just Google it. I will say this, try to keep an open mind and, we'll just get along fine. I will eventually put a link into my Minds profile below. If you want to have a gander and take a look into it, go ahead. But this just being from a fan perspective, I hope we can get along. So if I were to give an overall review on this, at best I would say an 8 out of 10 for the whole thing. That being said, if you guys enjoyed this, hit the like, share it across the net, spread the word about this graphic novel, and give credit where credit's due. That being said, hope you guys enjoyed it. This is Grid Zeta, signing off for now, and may the power protect you all.